a passage from the brief, architecture's conception of itself as a discipline, and we can extend that from architecture to many other disciplines, has depended for centuries on a model of the artificial in relation to the natural, and the primal human action in the wilderness to build a hut or make a bonfire. This tension between codex of preservation or rituals of conflagration also configures the very base of organic and planetary life and the negative entropies of design, the intentionalities. But our contemporary models of the world might deploy an alternative to the dialectic of conservation of energy or expenditure, what we could call a next nature or third nature, and we could draw, of course, on Mackenzie Wart's writing on third natures from many years ago, within which all disciplines can operate. Where is my mind? And yes, you can cue the pixies if you'd like there. So using Michael Whitmore's concept of massive addressability, we could ask, what are the limits of life and mind? This image that you see is visually representing the actions of neural networks. It looks like life, clearly, or at least the outlines of a form of life. But are the neural pathways that are indexed in this image, which is a map, in a way, are they proto-ecologies of mind, or are they just semi-animate crystalline structures? Here I would be reminded again of Werner Vinci's argument that the singularity will be like the Cambrian explosion of life, except it will be of different types and forms and species of mind, and in only 40 years instead of millions and millions of years. Now, interestingly, I think we could perfectly well say that the surface of Jupiter, the atmosphere of Jupiter, has sensory awareness. It does reality testing continuously because reality basically is always involved in reality testing if we assume that reality is real. It is irritable and it's arousable. So how could we argue that the planet Jupiter is not both sentient, but also perhaps somewhere between the gradient of sentient to sapient? Continue with Stephen Shaviro. In his recent book, Plant Thinking, Michael Marder credits plants with non-conscious intentionality. He means intentionality in the phenomenological sense, the idea that thought is of or about something. In this book, Stephen says, in his own book, I argue pretty much the reverse, that living organisms beyond and beneath their cognitive accomplishments exhibit something like non-intentional sentience. Again, the surface of Jupiter behind me, non-intentionally sentient. At least according to the timescales that we're accustomed to seeing cloud systems with intense chemical interchange and energetic flow operate across. And at the bottom here, Stephen continues by saying, I do not equate sentience with consciousness. I think that Whitehead is right in speaking of the relative rarity of consciousness and in suggesting that most occasions of feeling are non-conscious. Now, this should give you a sense of deja vu when you're thinking about what Peter Watts has to say about his own writing in his endnotes to Blindsight, as much as he speaks about different gradations of sentience and sapience and consciousness in the novel itself. Shaviro takes it on in such a beautiful way. Watts deals with all of this in a very direct way. Every human in Blindsight is already radically post-human, technologically altered, enhanced, sometimes beyond recognition. And the aliens are also far outside human concepts of mind and cognition. And if you've read the afterword to the novel, Watts goes to some lengths in the afterword to unpack what's at stake in the human to alien relationship. Central to Watts's argument is the idea that the alien civilization is a kind of flavor of philosophical zombie. They're able to interact with humans, perhaps as a Chinese room, to use Cyril's term. They have astounding computational capacity. They are star-faring civilization or species or system, but they have no model of self and they cannot indeed think themselves at all. Now let's think about human cognition here for a second. What does Watts have to say about it? He says in 2006, normal human cognition, quote, at least under routine conditions, consciousness does little beyond taking memos from the vastly richer subconscious environment, rubber stamping them, boom, good, let's do that, and taking the credit for itself. The conscious mind takes credit, right? In fact, the non-conscious mind usually works so well on its own that it actually employs a gatekeeper to do nothing but prevent the conscious self from interfering in daily operations. Sentience isn't even necessary to develop a theory of mind. That might seem completely counterintuitive. How could you learn to recognize that other individuals are autonomous agents? with their own interests and agendas if you weren't even aware of your own? Well, I mean, we think we're aware of our own, but if we spend a little bit of time wrestling with this idea, then it becomes a very interesting question. How much are we aware of our own interests and agendas? Really? But there's no contradiction, Peter Watts goes on to say, and no call for consciousness. It's entirely possible to track the intentions of others without being the slightest bit self-reflective. And that brings us to the final question. And this is where where Watts links it back to energy and where we link it back to energy. The question of what consciousness costs. Compared to non-conscious processing, self-awareness is slow and expensive. Consider the complex lightning-fast calculations of savants. Those abilities are non-cognitive, and there's evidence that they owe their superfunctionality not to any overarching integration of mental processes, but due to relative neurological fragmentation. So thinking costs energy and time. Thinking about thinking costs even more energy and time. How do we position this ethically and morally? You know, Agamben tries to do that with this idea of the form of life, this term that he's pulling from others as well and contextualizing against Zoe and bios. So the parallel that I'm drawing here is between life, mind, thought, low entropy systems, which could be living or non-living. So the attempt here, this is the punchline, I guess, of the entire talk today. The attempt here is to cite all of this in a universal cosmologically scaled stack. Not to say in a super hand-wavy way, wow, we're all, you know, embedded in these different layers in the stack and we connect at different time scales and different physical scales, different energy flows. But to say at each precise scale in the stack and point in the stack, because of material configurations, energetic configurations, time frames, specific technical solutions emerge. The human form is a technical solution. The film form or the form of the novel is a technical solution. Caffeine used by humans to keep themselves awake is a technical solution, etc., etc. What does Lem say now from his Summa? Every technology is actually an artificial extension of the innate tendency possessed by all living beings to gain mastery over their environment. Well, this connects back to Peter Watts. It's about survival, evolutionary adaptability, fitness functions, or at least not to surrender to it in their struggle for survival. Homeostasis has produced gravity-resistant calcareous and chitinous skeletons, mobility-enabling legs, wings, and fins, fangs, horns, jaws, and digestive systems that enable eating, and carapaces and masking shapes that serve as a defense against being eaten. Wow, Peter Watts clearly read his Lem, right? I mean, that's precisely what that passage from the island is also saying.